Welcome to the Scars of Heart channel, and invite you to watch our new original story. For Marina Kalugina, her husband's sudden announcement of his intention to divorce was more than a bolt from the blue. Vyacheslav's words about the clear horizon of her family life unfolded like a blinding flash, the wave of which instantly destroyed everything she had lived for the past 9 years. "What did you say?" she snapped icily, staring intently at Slava. "Marina, just don't get hysterical." Her husband looked away, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a gesture that had become so familiar to Marina, one that she had previously found extremely courageous, even somehow wise. Now, for some reason, Slava looked more like a guilty cat than the family's protector and eternal support. "And don't pretend that saving our marriage is your life's work. We've been living not like a married couple for 3 years now, but more like neighbors. On the landing, my life a woman has taken a fancy to it. Mine, that is, not even ours. And what about all those years we spent together? What about your favorite plaid shirt, which I wore holes in it, I was foolishly mending it at night, because you said there was a soul in it, neighbors. But for some reason this is only in your head. I don't think so at all. Listen, it happens. People live together and then separate. I fell in love with someone else. What should I do now? Or are you suggesting that we continue living together, pretending nothing happened? I respect you, so I prefer to tell you everything honestly and not put on a comedy called adultery. Fell in love with someone else." As if savoring every letter in these words, Marina drawled, looking at the stupid fly near the glass. "And who is this lucky woman? Just don't tell me that Polina from the accounting department, who was always writing to you, supposedly with work issues, while I was cooking dinner, is she?" "Yes, definitely she. I can see it in your eyes. Of course, how could you walk past? Legs from your ears, but the brains of a fly. Don't you dare insult her," Vyacheslav flared up. "Polina, unlike you, is a living person and not a robot housewife with perpetually pursed lips. Yes, she has great legs. You're right about that. But at least she takes care of herself and doesn't get fat, and only talk about home-cooked meals." "Alive," Marina echoed. "And I became a bio-robot, programmed for clean socks and borscht. Funny to hear this only now. For some reason you preferred to wait, not to bring up the issue earlier, when you were no longer satisfied with me as a woman. Was it difficult to talk? Or were you hoping that it would somehow be decided on its own, that I would be the first to leave? Or was it just convenient for you? And as soon as a pretty face turned up, you immediately realized there was no point in delaying your departure any longer." Slava remained silent. Marina, still bored with his gaze, walked over to the window and released the now despairing fly. She didn't scream, didn't even shed a tear. Something inside her snapped with a soft ringing sound, falling into an abyss of indifference and emptiness. The woman left the room, leaving her husband in splendid isolation. Marina headed for the kitchen. She mechanically opened the refrigerator and found herself staring at a jar of pickled cucumbers. Bunches of dill and a lonely clove of garlic floated in the murky brine, but not a single cucumber. And the bastard didn't leave a single one, she thought with a kind of detached philosophical calm, taking the jar off the shelf. Of course, he loves them so much. My pride. My signature recipe. What was he saying? The best cucumbers in the universe. And now, you see, our entire once happy life is floating in this jar. And nothing is left but dill. All I can think about is preserves. Yeah, right, I've been thinking about you, fool, all this time, so you could eat deliciously, crunch on these cucumbers, be happy that your wife cares for you. Well, maybe you're right, Slava, and I'd be better off pumping up my muscles instead of taking drugs. They divorced a month later. Vyacheslav, like an honest man, left his ex-wife the mortgage department, clearly not intending to help with the payments, which Marina's salary barely covered. But this heroic lover took everything else for himself: a nice dacha on the lake, a luxury SUV, a garage, and, most offensively, a brand new food processor, which he himself had given Marina for her birthday. He took it along with all the other appliances and most of the furniture, honestly bought with his own money. Essentially, he left Marina with nothing, clearly thinking that the apartment they had shared, even if not fully acquired, would more than compensate for all her emotional torment. Marina was left alone in a sterile 2-room apartment with an empty refrigerator. Slava hadn't made a move on it, being too old and Gromosky, and completely lacking any understanding of how to move on. She was 38, and she felt not just like an unhappy woman traded in for a younger and more beautiful one, but like a true reject, hopeless, beyond repair, morally and physically obsolete. Of course it was a shame. Thankfully, at least he didn't throw her out on the street. She thought their marriage was a fortress, albeit not always warm, with a roof that often leaked, but still a fortress. But Slava, it turns out, saw everything as an empty and comfortable cohabitation and said nothing until it became it's too late. He'd once sworn it, but what vows were there to speak of when long accountant legs loomed on the horizon, a fawning face, and the naive smile of the living Polonachka? When Vyacheslav Kalugin moved in with Polina, he immediately felt 20 years younger. It was as if a slab of concrete had been lifted from his shoulders. Breathing became easier. The 9 years of marriage, which had been weighing heavily on him lately, evaporated like yesterday's puddle on the hot asphalt. Polina was ethereal, as if woven from 1,000 floral scents of spring air and the lace of birdsong. She laughed often, tenderly stroked her beloved behind the ear, and knew nothing about making anything but coffee. But Slava found this so progressive, so sweet and touching. Nika's at Marinka's, he thought, laughing at his past life. There aren't any of these regulars. Buy some peppercorns, just not those small ones from the store, but bigger ones like the Uzbek ones at the kiosk. Let me put some sour cream on your side, so it's fatter. All I can think of is cooking. And she herself didn't realize how she'd become completely effeminate, as if a man only wants borscht and those pickled cucumbers. But she used to be so touching, too tender. And where did it all go? Do all women sooner or later turn into kvass-obsessed kvassis? No. Polya is completely different. The mere sight of a pot makes her sad. That's a good thing. Let her take better care of herself, it makes me happy. And I won't skimp. And why the hell did I take that food processor from Marina? I don't need it anyway. Besides, Polina won't even know which buttons to press. Marina would be more useful for it. No, this is my little personal protest against her culinary oppression. I can dine at a restaurant without any problem, and at the same time, I can show off my beautiful friend to everyone. And you'll want some pickled cucumbers at the store. There's plenty for every taste. Darling, I ordered sushi, Polina chirped, distracting her from thoughts of her ex-wife. Or did you want borscht? No, he practically jumped up like a man stung, remembering Marina's pursed lips when she left a generous portion of soup in front of him, with its pom-poms and garlic. For some reason, the image struck him as a scene from a dark horror film. I love sushi. While Polina took the order from the courier, who had unexpectedly appeared on the doorstep, Slava was swooning, gazing at her slender back and the luxurious wave of her dark blonde hair, flowing down to his lower back, and he smiled, glad that he finally wouldn't have to listen to his ex-wife's criticism about the eternal topic of socks strewn about. His new life flowed like a turbulent mountain stream, a swirl of faded smiles in the sun, bouncing the air like splashes of champagne, without which the new dangerous never saw an evening. Romance, generously seasoned with expensive bouquets and fine chocolate. Everything, just as Slava had pictured in his dreams. Beauty, he breathed, looking at Polina's slender legs and the shiny chocolate wrappers scattered throughout the apartment. This entire glossy idol, more reminiscent of a spread from a fashion magazine, lasted exactly until Vyacheslav Kalugin realized that the house had run out of toilet paper, washing powder, clean socks, and money. Polina spent his rather large salary with the grace of a starving python. The girl, chirping affectionately, bought her 10th pair of shoes and was genuinely surprised why there weren't enough funds on the card. Polia. Maybe you should? Slava tried to carefully select words, so as not to offend his carefree lover, who was already clutching the box with the shoes she liked in her tenacious paws. What? The girl blinked naively. What's wrong, darling? Do you really like these shoes? You have exactly the same ones. I bought them last week. I even wore them at home. The man smiled timidly, hoping to appeal to his girlfriend's voice of reason. What's wrong? It seemed like every hair on the girl's head stood on end, like an enraged dog's. These are completely different. Can't you see? Look at the leather here. This is ostrich, and those are made of snake. Ostrich, Slava grumbled, pulling a stack of bills out of his wallet. Did a crowd of natives personally catch him, and now they all want payment for their services? How can a pair of shoes cost as much as a Boeing wing? Well, don't be angry. Polina kissed the man on the nose, deftly fishing the money out of his hands and casually handing it to the saleswoman. You are so smart. You'll earn more. These are just pieces of paper. Polina went on and on, happily waving the bag with the new thing. At home, looking at Polina fluttering in an airy sundress. At another crumpled chocolate bar wrapper thrown on the living room table, shoes carelessly discarded in the corner, and online banking notifications about yet another credit card payment, he wistfully recalled how Marina managed to feed them both, pay the utilities, and the mortgage on his generally astronomical salary as a sales manager. And she also managed to buy him expensive cufflinks as a gift. She always paid for the gifts, as well as part of the mortgage payment, out of her own pocket, even though her salary as a foreman in a small canning shop was clearly insufficient for such expensive purchases. So everyone can see how much you care about the little things, his ex-wife would smile, snapping the cuffs on her shirt. Slava never delved into her accounting. It seemed to him that money was always there, practically falling from the sky. After all, both in their family earned money, and he earned the lion's share. And Marina is just a greedy boor, always whining about the need to save money and spend it more wisely. How Slava hated it when she came back from the supermarket bragging about how she'd managed to buy a couple of cans. Italian sauce for the price of one. But now, the man began to suspect that the very sky from which their former well-being had fallen was Marina, and not his bank account at all. And although his ex-wife didn't have a degree in economics, she easily outdid the Polish woman with a degree, who, as it turned out, was excellent at counting only her own money, and saw Vyacheslav's money as an inexhaustible source for her own needs. After several months of living with his new flame, Slava realized that clean clothes don't just appear in the closet, that the kitchen, sink, shower stall, and toilet don't have a self-cleaning function. God, how does she even live here? He looked with distaste at the laundry basket. She's a woman. It seemed to me that all women have a default function for maintaining cleanliness. Polia only polishes her face properly, but the house is a complete mess. Doesn't she notice? Marinka would laugh at me if she saw me with a vacuum cleaner or a rag. I've reached rock bottom. I come home from work, and instead of relaxing and hugging my beloved, I have to pick up all the dirt from the floor. This trash, clearing out your couch. Couldn't you at least clean up after yourself sometimes? He couldn't resist, tripping over a pizza box. Slavic, don't be such a bore, Polina pouted. I just got my manicure. What if I ruin it? You want me to be pretty. So what if you just pick it up with a box? It doesn't bother me. And anyway, you could call a cleaning service. No big deal. Vyacheslav wanted to scream at her, but he remained silent, feeling his jaw clench in an unusual, yet all the more familiar, spasm. It seemed his own lips were beginning to purse just as much as Marina's. Marina was sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at the empty pickle jar. There's a jar. No pickles, no husband, and no money either, she summed up. There really was no money. After the divorce, the woman realized with horror that her salary at the factory was utterly insufficient to pay the mortgage, cover daily expenses, and maintain a decent life for Malomalski. Of course, her habit of saving played into her hands. She was still able to make ends meet, but she knew she couldn't live like that. She wanted to enjoy every day, not counting pennies, praying that the company she worked for wouldn't go bankrupt and all the employees wouldn't be laid off. Unfortunately, such a prospect was far from plausible, and looking for a new job was terrifying. Marina's self-confidence had plummeted after the divorce, and the job market wasn't exactly brimming with lucrative offers. So Marina, always a pragmatist and a bore, set about searching for a solution. She had to clamp down on all her fears with a mighty bolt of willpower, giving free rein to her imagination, which usually languished on the sidelines. The idea of starting her own business, albeit a small one, was inspired by a video she saw online. In it, a striking woman in a starched apron with impeccable hair enthusiastically described how her ability to bake cupcakes had saved her family from ruin. A couple million subscribers, thousands of enthusiastic comments, and glossy pictures of breathtakingly beautiful baked goods fired Kalugina's imagination. She vividly imagined herself in the shoes of this internet beauty. Of course, Marina knew how to bake cupcakes too, but they were never her specialty. But homemade preserves. She picked up a notepad from the table and began to draw up her first ever business plan. A real one, with numbers, market analysis, and cost calculations. Premium pickles and preserves. She whispered enthusiastically, looking at her hands, which still remembered the first jar of pickles she'd canned. Hands, although not model-like, were quite skillful and ready for any difficulties, and these hands reached for the phone and dialed the number she least wanted to dial in this situation, but it was the only way out. "Hello, Mom." She sighed heavily, as if drawing in the last remaining oxygen in the world. "Marishka." "Hi." Evgenia Dmitrievna gasped on the other end of the line. "What news?" "I didn't expect your call. Something happened. Your voice sounds like it's coming from underwater." Marina rarely spoke to her mother. The woman disapproved of her daughter's marriage, sincerely believing that Marina had lost her entire personality under Vyacheslav's pressure. Evgenia herself was a feisty woman, couldn't stand being dependent on men, and successfully ran a real estate agency. She was quite merciless towards other people's failures and mistakes. In general, she was the one Marina would have asked for help at the last minute. But right now, it seemed, that moment had come. "Mom, Slava and I got divorced," Marina said into the phone. "What a tenna." The woman laughed with grim solemnity. "Finally, how long I've been waiting for this event." "Mom, let's not be cynical. So you call me to complain about the unfortunate lot of women, and I'm supposed to feel sorry for you and cheer you up." "Not at all," Marina sighed. "No words can help here." He left, and to hell with him. "I like this position," Evgenia chuckled. "Then what?" "Mom, I need money." Marina forced herself to clench her fist. Asking for financial assistance seemed not just shameful, but downright humiliating, knowing the full gravity of the consequences. "Money?" Evgenia asked in surprise. "And how much?" "A lot," Marina breathed out. Slava left me with nothing, apparently expecting me to slowly die without him. But I don't want to languish in a prison of suffering and self-pity. I want to prove to everyone, especially myself, that I have a decent life. And you've probably already thought of a way, her mother asked briefly. Otherwise you wouldn't have forced yourself to ask me for help. I know you well. If everything were even partially rosy, you would have ignored my phone number in your contacts again. Mom, could you at least not humiliate me sometimes? Yes, I know I once asked you to stay out of my life, but I really have no one else to turn to. I want to start my own business. I want to climb out of this hole. Okay, Evgenia unexpectedly agreed. I like that you don't fawn and don't try to go back on what you said earlier. I've always valued honesty in people, and believe me, if you were here now, all honeyed up trying to please me, I would just hang up. So, how much do you need? With the money her mother lent her, Marina rented a small, damp-smelling basement apartment on the outskirts of town. There had once been some kind of cafe or canteen here. The former kitchen still held rows of electric stoves, dust-covered refrigerators and freezers, and cobweb-covered range hoods protruding from the walls. Looking at all this splendor, the woman she only thought that after some time, her strict mother would demand her investment back, which meant she couldn't afford to make a mistake. Having tidied up everything inside, Marina went to the village where her grandmother, Ksenia Petrovna Kuznetsova, once lived. She had one goal: to buy as many berries, vegetables, and herbs as possible, honestly grown in ordinary gardens, not in soulless greenhouses. Marina knew that the land in her grandmother's homeland was special, and the taste of its fruits incomparable. The locals, remembering Ksenia Petrovna, happily sold her granddaughter the fruits of their labor: crisp cucumbers, plump tomatoes, neat yellow squashes resembling clumps of dark matter, black currants. Marina filled an entire gazelle with all these riches. She stocked up on sugar, salt, and the necessary spices, buying them from her favorite shop, owned by an Uzbek family, where she'd shopped for many, many years. She ordered a whole batch of eye-catching jars from a marketplace. She made arrangements with a printing house, where they quickly sketched out labels and designed a logo for her future empire, and began working. Day and night, from morning until evening, without feeling tired, without thinking about sleep. Marina had a goal for the first time in a long time, and when a woman sets herself something, she never gives up or stops halfway. She recalled all her grandmother's secrets, which Ksenia Petrovna willingly shared with her granddaughter, saying that one day would come when all this would surely change her life. Currant leaves for a special crunch, grated horseradish to bring tears, star anise for a magical aroma, cranberries and caraway seeds in cabbage, mint leaves in currant jam, garlic scapes and basil leaves in a jar of pickled squash. Grandma's recipe for zucchini caviar deserved special attention. It brought an expression of indescribable bliss to the faces of everyone who had ever tried the appetizer. Marina worked selflessly in her new kitchen, sparing no effort. Her arms ached, her back was aching, but she stubbornly chopped, stirred, twisted, and sterilized. The smell of vinegar made her head spin. Sweat poured from the steam above the stove. Even the range hood couldn't cope. The aromas were so intense that all the neighbors, the cats, went crazy and staged concerts outside the door. When the first batch of beautiful jars was ready, Marina, admiring the name as if it were a work of art, carefully arranged everything on the shelves in the hall, set up a tripod, propped her phone on it, and started recording. She settled herself at the table, smiled broadly at the camera, and, almost silently, began tying a small, colorful piece of cloth around each lid, carefully wrapping it with twine, securing thick cardboard tags on which, in neat black ink, the love in every piece was written. The first clients were found online, where Marina created several advertising pages and groups. In each, She wrote a simple and honest message addressed to potential buyers. Tired of the dullness of everyday life, problems at home or work? Giving up? Try my cucumbers, they will restore your faith in life. The text was accompanied by colorful photographs of the perfect jars and Marina herself, with a slightly crazy but sincere look in a funny chef's hat and checkered apron. Orders didn't come pouring in right away. For the first couple of months, Marina managed to sell at the best price. In some cases, a dozen jars. Customers weren't rushing to leave reviews, and they weren't rushing to buy more with wads of cash. The woman even thought they didn't like it. But she quickly shook those thoughts away. They couldn't help but like it. They just couldn't. Marina's cucumbers were the best in the universe. But then, a miracle happened. A well-known businesswoman in town, going through her third divorce, bought a jar of pickled tomatoes from Marina, and a couple of days later, a bewildered Marina was barely able to cope with the hundreds of messages pouring in her private messages. Her phone was ringing off the hook. Everyone was desperate to try these wonderful tomatoes. I want them like Allah's, every other woman wrote. My wife tried some at a friend's and said that if I don't bring home a jar of your tomatoes today, she'll kick me out. Save me, the men wrote. It turned out that Alla Shevaleva, the same businesswoman, had posted a photo of herself with a jar of Marina Kalugina's preserves on one of her popular social media accounts. A video immediately went viral, showing the same woman devours juicy tomatoes with gusto, declaring that if anything could heal emotional wounds, it was a jar of Marina Kalugina's homemade preserves. The success was phenomenal. Marina herself didn't expect that there would be a virtual hunt for her delicious homemade preserves. She barely had time to produce a new batch before everything was snatched up. In the fall, apples, cabbage, mushrooms, cranberries, and pumpkins were in demand. By the end of the season, Marina realized she had seriously miscalculated. People kept demanding new delicacies. However, the village vegetable supply was clearly insufficient to meet the growing demand. She had to raise prices, but even that didn't stop those who wanted them. The shelves in her rented basement were emptied of signature jars of cucumbers, rows of jars of jam grew, and the shelves of herbal infusions and signature teas were emptying. Winter and spring became a time of respite for Marina. She continued to study the market, traveling to villages, negotiating deliveries for the following year, and asking locals for special recipes. At the same time, the woman was making videos about herself, her journey into the world of home-cooked food through a bitter divorce, and she talked about her grandmother, sharing family secrets she'd passed down. People loved her simple delivery. Information, women actively engaged in conversation in the comments, boasting about their salads and jarred jams. Even men often joined in, recommending excellent spice sellers, inviting people fishing, and sharing their fish pickling secrets. Marina just laughed, amazed at her sudden popularity, and as soon as the season began, she plunged back into work. This time, she was much better prepared. She rented a small warehouse where she stored her farm trophies. She hired a couple of culinary students to help her, as well as someone who took on the task of promoting her social media pages and advertising them through popular bloggers. Despite all her efforts, the profits weren't that great. Rent, advertising, and purchasing raw materials consumed the lion's share. Furthermore, the power went out several times in the warehouse, and everything stored in the refrigerators went bad. She had to quickly figure out how to save money and buy a new batch of produce. And competitors have tried to ruin her reputation more than once, but Marina was not discouraged and stubbornly pursued her goal. A year later, Kalugina, now known as the Cucumber Queen, left her inconspicuous basement and moved into a bright, sterile workshop in a former factory. She already had 3 assistants. Pre-orders were placed almost a month in advance. Marina developed a unique product line: cucumbers of comfort, tomatoes of oblivion, assorted new life. The labels featured ironic pictures with sketches of recognizable family scenes. She finally bought herself a couple of excellent food processors, got her driver's license, and almost paid off the mortgage that had been so burdensome. Even the debt to her mother was mostly settled. Evgenia wasn't in any particular rush, seeing that her daughter was doing well, but she still had no intention of giving Marina money. Meanwhile, Vyacheslav's family life was slowly but surely turning from a fairy tale into a nightmare. Polina never intended to change for the better. However, Slava still found something useful in her whims. Thanks to her high standards, he quit his old job and found a more cushy position. But even their nearly doubled income wasn't quite enough to keep up. All the demands of a demanding woman. Now Polina, sincerely believing there was no point in toiling away in the accounting department while her husband earned a good living, sat at home and spent money at double the speed. Vyacheslav, who had initially tried to appeal to her reason, eventually simply gave in. She manipulated him as easily as if he were a doll. And with just the twitch of a string, a brand new ring with a dazzling stone would sparkle on his finger. When Polina, tired of idleness, suddenly asked her beloved one day to give her not just anything for her birthday, but a creative studio, Slava was even delighted. Maybe she'll finally occupy herself with something useful, he sighed with relief, imagining his friend keeping other slackers like herself occupied for days with primitive paintings, artistic sculpting, and all sorts of scrapbooking. Polya had never had any creative talent, which, however, didn't stop her from considering herself a genius. Vyacheslav only sighed, seeing her latest masterpiece. Chaotic collections of brains on canvases, crookedly molded polymer clay figurines, abstract contraptions of incomprehensible purpose, which his mistress proudly displayed on her page. And when, having taken out a loan, he moved all this magnificence to a small studio sharing space with some pretentious beauty salon, he even breathed a sigh of relief. At home, he was overwhelmed by the endless scattered paints, brushes, packaging for sculpting clay, and other junk. And suddenly, it turned out that the less he and Polina interacted with each other at home, the easier it was for them to get along. Vyacheslav even thought that finally their nightmare would once again become that beautiful fairy tale into which he had escaped the routine with his ex-wife that had held him back for years. Life was improving, although it was putting a considerable strain on his wallet. Polina made new friends, spending almost all her time in her wonderful studio, where she beckoned like honey to women like herself. The creative workshop was only bringing in losses, but for the man the main thing was that Polina was no longer buzzing around his ear like an angry wasp. Slava simply relaxed, returning from work to the quiet of the apartment, where there was no longer endless chaos reigned. True, he still had to restore order himself. One day, Polina returned home in an incomprehensible state of confusion. Sparks of surprise and even a kind of anger danced across her indignant face. "Slav, you won't believe who I saw." "Your ex." The girl nervously threw her expensive handbag on the floor and hung her coat on the hook with such force that its loop cracked and broke. Vyacheslav, very tired after a hard day, sighed heavily and reluctantly tore himself away from the TV screen, on which an extremely tense scene in his favorite series was unfolding. "And how is she?" The man winced, feeling an incomprehensible longing for Marina. For a long time now, his ex-wife has not seemed to him the boring and plump ugly woman he saw before the divorce. He lost weight out of boredom and works as a cashier in a supermarket. "Oh no," Polina jumped up. She was leaving Lavelle. "What?" Slava rolled his eyes, not having the slightest idea what his talkative lover was talking about. "Lavelle," Polina drawled. "Don't you know what this place is? It's right next to my creative studio." "Well, beauty salon. So what?" The man looked at her indifferently. "All women go to hairdressers, just like men, without understanding what the tragedy is. What? The girl stamped her foot. At least in the fact that a haircut there costs as much as a month's subscription to my classes. And your wife was dressed. Slava, it was clearly not second-hand. I recognize a brand name jacket. Besides, she got into a brand new crossover. Where did she get the money? You told me that you left her nothing but a mortgaged 2-room apartment. It turns out you lied to me. She lives better than us. Vyacheslav felt the blood rush to his head, and his hands began to tremble. A brand new crossover, you said? He narrowed his eyes. You were mistaken, Paul. Marinka doesn't even know how to drive. It couldn't have been her. You were mistaken. Women like Marina, they're weak. They just pine away and feel sorry for themselves. She spent all our marriage working as a junior technologist in some shabby canning factory. They wouldn't even give her a car loan. Sure, it's possible that Marina found someone else, but God, don't be ridiculous. Who would want her? A downtrodden, overfed woman. A woman with a perpetually disgruntled expression. He sincerely believed what he was saying. But still, the first cracks appeared in Vyacheslav's picture of the world, where Marina embodied a dull but stable yesterday, and Polina a risky and bright tomorrow. His tomorrow stubbornly resembled expired yogurt, which had been sitting in the refrigerator for a week with the label slightly torn, emitting unpleasant odors, and the contents were frightening. It was even scary to touch. But Marina's yesterday, judging by everything, had somehow miraculously transformed into an excellent aged wine, one bottle of which would easily adorn a connoisseur's collection. I'm telling you for sure, Polina persisted. It was her. I wouldn't mistake her for anyone else. She has a mole on her cheek and that looked like a teacher's, and she recognized me too. You could tell by her eyes. Slava waved her hand, not wanting to pursue the matter further. However, a worm of doubt was already burrowing its way into his soul. Standing in front of the large mirror in the reception area of the conference room of Ekarai, the city's largest agricultural holding, Marina was visibly nervous. Today wasn't just an important day, it was a turning point in her life. Today, she was supposed to present her products to a top manager of a holding company interested in purchasing Marina's franchise for producing consolation cucumbers using produce from her own organic farms. The day before, she had signed a contract that would not only significantly improve Marina's life, but also take her products to a whole new level. The offer from Ekarai came unexpectedly and came as something of a shock to Marina. She never imagined such a large company could be seriously interested in some internet-famous woman enthusiastically sealing jars of cucumbers on camera. Moreover, the offer came at the perfect time. Her small company, although successful, was still suffering. Constant inspections and growing demand required modernization of the production facility and employee training, but there was no extra money for this. Furthermore, a serious accounting flaw had recently been discovered. A large batch of pickles went bad before they even reached the counter. And you're still thinking. Evgenia looked skeptically at her daughter when while sorting through the financial documents, she voiced the offer, Eco Paradise. Definitely agree. This is your chance to become steadily profitable, to grow. Offers like these come once in a lifetime. Yes, Mom, but I'm afraid. Of what? That they'll swallow you up sooner or later? Maybe it's for the best. You'll sell them your company for a decent amount of money. You'll become quite a wealthy lady. You'll switch to something else. I don't want something else, Marina was indignant. My company is my child. I won't give it up for any amount of money. I'm afraid for something else, that Ekarai will ruin my concept. We put our heart and soul into every jar. I personally buy only the best products from local farmers. What if these giants skimp on raw materials, ruin the recipe, and people will be disappointed? No need to be afraid. For the first time in many years, she hugged her daughter Evgenia. You're doing everything right. What kind of fortitude does it take to create, practically from scratch, what you built? Not without your help, Marina smiled. Not without mine, who would argue? But money is just pieces of paper. The most important thing is here. Evgenia put her palm to it, feeling her heartbeat. Soul, my daughter. That's what makes your products stand out from the crowd. Hundreds of competitors. But development is also important. This deal is a crucial step for growth, and it would be foolish to refuse. Just don't bend to their terms. Dictate yours. That's all. Bound by the contract, they won't change the recipe or presentation format so abruptly. Her mother's words provided the necessary support. And now, although Marina was nervous, she was no longer afraid. Dressed in a strict, insanely expensive dress the color of warm milk, with neat earrings in her ears, enveloped in the aroma of exquisite perfume with notes of vetiver and amber, and not brine, the woman looked confident and successful. Someone like that would hardly be ignored. Marina tightened her grip on the handle of the stylish briefcase, inside which lay a single jar, a sample for tasting. The woman smiled at her reflection. Looking back at her from the mirror was the beautiful, self-sufficient Marina Kalugina, a slight, ironic smile playing on her lips. Vyacheslav Kologan was completely unprepared for an important business meeting with a promising new partner, to which he was unexpectedly invited by a top manager, but he couldn't refuse to participate. The offer promised a decent percentage, which should be enough to satisfy Polina's growing appetite. He'd been working as a senior purchasing manager at the Ekarai Agricultural Holding for 6 months now, successfully attracting new partners. What kind of client? He casually asked his assistant, who hastily thrust a folder with the deal documents at him. Why didn't Maxim Petrovich warn me in advance? Because Vasiliev was stuck in traffic, the girl grimaced, and the negotiations were about to begin. You're quick to navigate any situation, and there aren't any other available managers. Okay, Vyacheslav grimaced, realizing they weren't calling him for his salesmanship, but simply out of polite necessity. This struck a chord with his pride, but then a bright sign flashed through his mind. Money has no smell. There was no point dwelling on pride and ambition, and even just rubbing Vasiliev's nose in this way was already good enough. Let him kick himself later for missing out on a lucrative partner because of his brand new car, which, as usual, decided to show off on the clogged roads. Vyacheslav glanced at the documents. Some company specializing in premium homemade preserves. Grani Gourmet, Kalugin chuckled, looking at the photographs of the attractive jars and already imagining a plump old woman, smelling of pickle juice and tomatoes, sitting modestly on the edge of her chair in their spacious conference room, her legs tucked under her, seemingly effortlessly processed. He entered the conference room, elegantly adjusting his tie, which had slipped to one side, and paused in the doorway. She wasn't sitting at the main table with Maxim Petrovich, but comfortably seated on a large leather sofa, pointing to something on colorful brochures spread out before her. Maxim Petrovich sat next to her, interested, incredibly captivated, and utterly delighted. But the worst part was that this was not the old woman smelling of pickle juice, but the real Marina, his ex-wife, whom Slava had left penniless, with only a mortgage and a jar of pickles, and she looked completely different. She was no longer the tired, disgruntled woman who had looked longingly at him 2 years ago. Like a fly. Marina was beautiful. She looked up at him. There was no anger, no reproach, no triumph in the woman's gaze. Marina looked with mild surprise. And here comes our Vyacheslav. Maxim Petrovich almost jumped up, introducing the potential partner to the manager who had undertaken to handle the deal. I think you'll find common ground. Our Slava really loves pickles. Vyacheslav Sergeyevich, good afternoon. Marina flashed a smile. I didn't expect to see you here. So, have you met? The boss paused for a second. Yes, we have. Vyacheslav sighed and pulled out a chair for himself. When he sat down, still not taking his eyes off his ex-wife, he was sure that this very chair would cave in under him right now, making the situation even more ridiculous. The man felt as if he had been thrown out into the cold. But Marina, on the contrary, behaved calmly, even professionally, made brilliant jokes about the comfort factor of her cucumbers, clearly explained how a properly prepared brine breaks stereotypes about hopelessness, and Slava did nothing but look at he listened to her voice and was amazed at how beautiful Marina was. She didn't have the obsessive beauty that distinguished Polina. This was a completely different beauty, deep, calm, dear. Before him sat a woman who clearly knew her worth and didn't try to emphasize it with hundreds of meaningless outfits, long nails, flashy makeup, and a capricious speech. And she was also successful, strong-willed, goal-oriented, and wise. After the presentation, when everyone had left and Maxim Petrovich ordered the lead manager to discuss the details with the new partner, Slava approached his ex-wife, who was collecting brochures from the table with wobbly legs. "Marina," he called out to her in a trembling voice. "I don't even know what to say. Unless I'm a complete idiot." "I know," she said calmly, smiling without a hint of mockery. "It all burst out because of that jar, which I left empty in the refrigerator that time." Marina smiled, displaying a whole range of emotions, from regret to bitter irony. "No, Slavka, not because of the can, but because of the aching emptiness you left when you slammed the door behind you. I decided that, since the jar was empty, it was high time to fill it up again, and this time, without you." She simply stood and looked at her ex-husband, so confused and dejected that she even felt sorry for him, and her gaze suddenly softened. "Don't blame yourself. You did badly. But, oddly enough, it was the best thing you did for me. You simply pulled the plug on our family life, thinking that you had de-energized everything, and it turns out I was running on my own batteries. So don't worry, we'll get along. I prefer not to remember the past, especially since I have a completely different life now, and there's no room for resentment in it. So let's discuss the details, as your boss ordered. There's a lot of work ahead. Marin, tell me, can we be friends?" The man squeezed out a pitiful but sincere phrase. Friends. Marina was taken aback, and then laughed. Openly and loudly, like they hadn't laughed even once in their 9 years of marriage. "Well, let's give it a try. We'll have tea occasionally and discuss market trends in agricultural products. I'll treat you to free samples for tasting. Just don't bring your Polina, or she might give me heartburn." "Just like me," Slava grumbled, blushing. Marina held out her hand. Slava squeezed it tightly, feeling treacherous tears welling up in his eyes. He had lost not just a wife, but a true treasure. Not even lost, but personally and mercilessly thrown into the trash for a soulless piece of glass. That evening, leaving work, the man got into his faded SUV, permeated with the stifling scent of Pauline perfume. His phone vibrated in his pocket. "Hello," Vyacheslav answered, tired and reluctant, to a call from his rather annoying girlfriend. "Slav, buy some sushi at that restaurant near your office," Polina cooed. "Pay for the internet, too, or they'll cut you off." "Uh-huh," Vyacheslav said gloomily. He looked longingly at the dark windows of the conference room, where a couple of hours ago his ex-wife, the queen of cucumbers, the empress of currant jam, the mistress of vinegar and sugar, had shone in all her glory. And at that moment, he hated with all his soul the damned sushi, which had become quite boring after 2 years of living with Polina. He sighed heavily. For the first time in a long time, he wanted simple, pungent, crispy, salted cucumbers, which he loved her so much. After that meeting in Ekore, Vyacheslav Kalugin almost stopped sleeping. No, he slept of course, but the dreams were so intense that it would have been better not to go to bed at all. He dreamed of Marina. She stood silently atop a mountain of cans filled with deer meat, looking at her ex-husband with an expression of mild regret, the kind you might look at a puppy making a puddle in the hallway. They rarely had to see each other for work, and Slava didn't particularly want to see his ex-wife's disdainful smile or listen to her demands. But he couldn't bear it, marinating in his melancholy for a couple of months. After waiting for Polina to leave for her latest useless masterclass on intuitive clay modeling, he dialed Marina's number. His hands were shaking like a teenager's before a first date. "Hello?" came her calm, slightly tired voice on the other end. "Marinka, it's me," he blurted out, feeling his palms betrayingly sweat. "Listen, I wanted to apologize. Not over the phone. But can I come over? I know you're busy now, so choose your own time and place to meet. It could be in the workshop or the warehouse, and I'm ready to load cucumbers." Free, there was a pause on the line. Slava braced himself for the short, gruff voices, but instead, his ex-wife's laughter rang out. So familiar, so warm. "Loading cucumbers, you say?" That ironic note had crept into Marina's voice, the one he'd once almost hated with all his soul, but which he'd now suddenly found magical. "Well, come over, since I have nothing better to do. But today, I'm not in the warehouse. I'm demonstrating a new product. Gherkins of insight with mustard and caraway. Just right for you. I'll text you the address." The tasting was taking place in a small, stylish loft that Marina rented for meetings with partners and advertisers. Slava walked in, feeling like a bull in a china shop. Girls were sitting on soft ottomans and sofas. Men strolled leisurely around the long table, their expressions satisfied, sampling the treats on offer. Waiters were everywhere again, carrying trays of conapes. The highlight of the show, of course, was the pickles. Guests were laughing, chatting animatedly, taking photos next to a huge jar of cucumbers. He spotted Marina at the counter, where she was arranging tiny pickles onto plates. "Perfect gherkins. Have you come after all?" She smiled, waving at her ex-husband. "Help yourself with these with pink peppercorns for courage. I bet you've never tried anything like this before." Vyacheslav speared one of the gherkins with his fork, took a bite and was stunned. It was a veritable explosion of flavor. Crunch, spiciness, sweetness, a piquant bitterness, all at once. Oh my God. He shook his head, closing his eyes. "Marina, I'm just an idiot. A complete, utter, worthless, clinical idiot. I have no idea what to do to atone for my guilt. I betrayed you, left you with nothing. And not only did you not give in, you also went all out. As if all I've done all my life is hold back your talents, languish you in the prison of my ambitions. I should have believed in you a long time ago, helped you with the implementation, and not with lava," Marina interrupted, stopping to rearrange the cucumbers. "I don't hold a grudge. True, what you did was mean. I don't argue with that, but it was like a jar bursting in the cellar. There was a lot of clatter and clanging. It smelled of soaked brine. And then you clean up the shards, air it out, and suddenly it turns out that there's a lot of space left on the shelf for new preparations. You freed me without even realizing it. So thank you. I want to fix everything," the man said stubbornly, "not to return to the way it was. I understand that's impossible. And you probably already have someone, but I want to become your real friend, if you let me, of course. I will help you in everything, support you if needed. I want you to truly forgive me. It gnaws at me, keeps me awake." "You talk like a friend," Marina answered after a short silence. She picked another cucumber from the plate and handed it to her ex-husband. "Well, let's try. But remember, a friend is not someone who gives flowers and compliments, but someone who is ready to go with you at 3 a.m. to the wholesale market, who will help you push a car stuck in the village mud, who will listen to old people chatter for hours for a decent discount on tomatoes, who will drive around the whole city in search of spices when the supplier has let you down. "I'll go," Slava exclaimed eagerly. "And what will your Polina say, I wonder, when you break down in the middle of the night?" Marina narrowed her eyes slyly. "I don't care that she'll say." Vyacheslav frowned. "I can't stand listening to her pointless masterclasses. The cost of manicures, the lack of discounts on shoes. I have the right to do what I want, and not dance to her tune." Thus began their strange friendship. Slava, to Marina's surprise and to his own, turned out to be truly useful. He ruthlessly negotiated even with the most intractable suppliers, haggled for such discounts that even the most hardened tradesmen blushed, and most importantly, he sincerely admired Marina's work. With his help, Granny Gourmet significantly saved on purchasing, doubled, even tripled her sales, and the logistics system now worked much more smoothly than before. "You're a genius, Marinka," Slava said, trying another experimental batch of pickles. "These aren't tomatoes, but a work of art. I never really liked them, but here you can really feel a piece of your soul in each one piece, in every drop of brine. It's a pity my soul isn't made of rubber. At this rate, I'll roll it all up in a jar." Marina waved it off. But hearing such words from her ex-husband was quite nice. Polina, having learned of Slava's renewed contact with his ex-wife, caused a huge scandal. It happened when the tired but extremely pleased with himself man returned from another night of forays to the wholesale warehouse. As soon as he crossed the threshold of the apartment, he literally tripped over the neatly folded garbage bags by the entrance. "What's this?" Looking at my friend's face distorted with anger, he asked. "You finally decided to clean up yourself, and I, as I understand it, have to take out the trash. These are your things," the girl snorted. "Or did you think I would silently tolerate it while you and your ex-husband were out there, rolling out cucumbers into jars?" "Polina, get out," she shrieked, throwing his own socks, which she pulled out of the first bag she came across, at the man. "You promised me a beautiful life, but all you do is yell at me for some lousy bag and stink of that disgusting brine. I don't want to see you again." Slava stood there, looking at the bags, and felt a colossal relief fill his soul. It was as if a cast had suddenly been removed from him, preventing him from moving and breathing. "Well, all right." He sighed and he grabbed a couple of bags. "I'm leaving. I probably should have done this a long time ago. You and I are not a couple, no matter how hard you try to convince me otherwise. So go to her." Polina kicked the bag. "You cheapskate and a traitor. I've wasted so much time on you." "I'm not going to her, but to my place," Vyacheslav smiled. "To a place where I've long forgotten the way. It's time to remember. By the way, I need to pay the rent for your studio tomorrow. You'll manage without me somehow." "What?" the girl screamed. "How dare you leave me? Where will I get the money?" Well, Slava no longer listened to her screams. He dragged all the bags to the elevator and slammed the door behind him. The man rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts, but he felt so good. For the first time in a long time, Slava lived alone, and he liked it. There was no litter strewn about, no trash bag overflowing with sushi wrappers, no pile of unwashed laundry, no overflowing closet. There was only him, the old sofa, the cozy kitchenette, and a mind freed from oppressive thoughts. His friendship with Marina grew stronger with each passing day. They began calling each other in the evenings, discussing not only cucumbers but also books read, the latest news, recently watched movies. Marina laughed at the famous jokes, and he at her ironic remarks. Once, when a pipe burst in the workshop around 1 in the morning, Marina called her ex-husband in a panic. He rushed over 10 minutes later in old sweatpants and with a set of wrenches he'd borrowed from a new neighbor. Together, wet and grimy, they stopped the flood, and then sat on the salvaged vegetable crates, drank tea from a thermos, and laughed at the absurdity of the situation. "Listen, Kalugan," Marina said, looking at the man with unexpected warmth. "And it turns out you're okay if you don't try to pretend to be someone you're not. I haven't seen you like this in a long time." "I didn't expect this from myself either," Slava replied, feeling his heart begin to pound. "But now I understand why everything works out for you. You don't stop in the face of difficulties. People are drawn to you. You give them something that's hard to just buy somewhere." "I always thought that the most important thing in the world is the outer gloss. The more successful you are, the brighter the sun and the brighter the colors. But success alone is clearly not enough. Without a soul, it's hard to call yourself a human being. Thank you, Marina, for reminding me of the importance of a heartbeat." He fell in love again with the same woman he'd once lost through his own foolishness. But this was a completely different love, not the one once based on habits and convenience, and not the one that flared up in the illusion of a love affair with Polina. Vyacheslav felt with his whole soul a deep, calm, and reverent feeling, woven from respect, admiration, and endless gratitude for a peculiar second chance. But he was afraid to admit this to his ex-wife. He was overcome by the fear of frightening away the fragile bond that had grown between them. Slava began to notice strange behavior in himself. Without any reason, he would buy Marina's favorite pastries, suddenly remember her favorite tea and bring it to her in a thermos, and sometimes he would catch himself smiling stupidly just looking at her photo or her name in his phone contacts. One day, he plucked up the courage and invited Marina for a walk in the park. It was a beautiful autumn day, filled with fallen leaves and damp wood. The aroma of freshly baked goods wafted from the piata, apples and cinnamon. The former spouses were walking down the alley. Marina was talking about a new idea, pine cone jam with cardamom, which was definitely worth making at the end of May. And I would add grapefruit or blood orange juice instead of lemon. Marin Slava suddenly interrupted her. "I have to tell you something. I know I have no right to, but I love you. Not the old Marina, whom I didn't appreciate, but the you of today. Strong, smart, funny, real. I'm not asking you to reciprocate my feelings. I just want you to know how I feel." The man fell silent, feeling his heart ready to burst out of his chest, like a bear awakened in the middle of winter. The woman looked at him with a long, searching gaze, and in her eyes, wet from the autumn wind, he suddenly saw not mockery, but something completely different. Something very warm, a little frightened. "Oh, Slavka," she said slowly, stretching her lips into a smile. "You once left me with an empty jar, and now you're trying to get it all back again? What if all our love turned sour again?" "It won't turn sour," he exhaled. "Him, now I know that my ingredient simply needed to be tested over time. While it was immature, it only spoiled the whole brine." Marina laughed, scaring away a flock of pigeons dozing near the bench. "I can't promise you anything," Marina smiled sadly. "Now I'm married to my work. Let everything go as it goes. I'm not pushing you, but don't push too much either. I feel good next to you, but my feelings cooled a long time ago. I understand. That is no chance. Why? Who knows what will happen tomorrow?" Marina sighed. Looking at the lanterns coming on in the twilight, the philologists were learning to be together again, but now consciously, with respect for each other's personal space. Marina had her own home, her own business, her own habits. Slava had his own bachelor pad and a new job. He quit the eco-friendly restaurant and took a position as a development manager at Granny Gourmet. From the outside, their new life might have seemed amusing. They spent almost all their time together, but every evening the man went home. This added romance and spice to their relationship. Long walks, dinners in tiny cafes, fresh flowers in pots as gifts instead of soulless bouquets. Everything they never had before. One evening, while sitting in the office checking documents, Slava started a conversation. "Marina, do you remember how you dreamed of a house by the sea, where you could sit on the veranda, watch the sunset and sip homemade wine?" "I remember," she smiled, surprised that you remembered. "It was so long ago. You still thought it was stupid, because you were stupid yourself. So, I've found an option here. A small plot of land on the coast. Not the first line, of course, but still a very picturesque place. And just a stone's throw from the sea. A wonderful house. Small, cozy. You can come there when you get tired of the city. When you just want some privacy. Maybe we'll buy it 50-50. As partners." Half and half. Marina froze, holding the invoice in her hands. She noticed that passionate twinkle in Slava's eyes that she had once known so well. But now that spark was not aimed at a fleeting infatuation, but at her, at them, at their shared future. "What if you decide to run off with some masseuse again?" Out of the question, Vyacheslav answered seriously. "First of all, masseuses are unlikely to appreciate my exquisite taste in pickles. And secondly, Marina, I've already found my home, and now I definitely don't want to lose it again." Marina put the papers aside, walked up to him, and for the first time in a long time, without Fame's initiative, kissed him. And both of them felt at that moment that their new story was just beginning, and it would be brewed not according to the old tired recipe, but according to a new, secret one, which they would create together from equal parts respect, friendship, and a vibrant web of feelings. And in this story, there would be no more empty jars.